Chapter 1. Erica Hayes had spent the better part of the weekend sending back the wedding gifts. Writing the apologies was the hardest part, and as much as she hated doing it, the truth was that she could not stand having gifts that reminded her of the wedding that was supposed to take place. She took a deep breath when she was done writing the last note and put it in the envelope. She never really did understand why the woman was always left to deal with the mess in the aftermath. She always wondered why it couldn't be the other way round. Maybe for once, men needed to have a taste of what life was like when the shoe was on the other foot. She sat down and sighed before switching on the TV. From the corner of her eye, she could see her phone screen blinking on and off. She had put her phone on silent mode and unhooked her house phone. She needed her space. She needed the silence. And it was better that way, because every time her phone would ring, it would be some person with heartfelt apologies about her wedding. And honestly, she'd heard enough of that already. As she sat there, she thought of Eli and the times they'd had. But even though she was trying to focus on the better days of the relationship, her memories seemed set on the day she busted Eli cheating. It was on a Thursday afternoon, and she was feeling on top of the world as she walked to her white BMW. "You really showed them, Hayes," Morris Kirkland, her boss, said with a smile. "Thanks, Mr. Kirkland," she said with a smile. Morris leaned on the hood of her car and looked at her. "You keep that up and I will definitely be seeing you in the partnership list soon," he said. Erica smiled and nodded. "That is perfect because I have really been wondering when that raise was going to come," she said. Morris smiled and then laughed. "At this rate, sooner than you think," he said before he walked away, leaving Erica standing there with butterflies in her tummy. She could not help but feel proud of herself. She had taken on one of the most difficult cases she had ever heard of, and she had killed it. A $5 million settlement was not something people expected, especially since the initial offer had been $400,000. Actually, no one had seen that coming, not even the other lawyers. Everyone thought that she would probably get $1 million or $1.5 million, not more than that. Guess everyone was more than a little shocked when they heard the ruling. As soon as she got in the car, she cranked up the radio and smiled to herself as she sang along to Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer. "Oh yeah, there ain't no school like the old school," she thought as she sang along. She passed by Antonio's Grill, one of her favorite restaurants. She had made it a habit to get a celebratory dinner of ravioli and cherry tomatoes from Antonio's, and as usual, she always got 2 dinners. She had just walked out of Antonio's when she decided to give Eli a heads up and let him know she was on her way. "That's odd," she thought when Eli didn't pick up. "Maybe he is in the bathroom or something," she thought as she started her car. She shrugged and buckled in before she began driving home. She had considered getting a touch-up on her hair, but she shrugged the thought off. "If it was good enough for the jury, then it is good enough for Eli," she said to herself as she caught a glimpse of her reflection. Erica liked to consider herself as a small person with a big personality. She had learned to love and appreciate her height the day she discovered high heels. After spending her years in high school and college being the short girl, she had made a decision to see her glass as half full, especially since she was the most promising student in her class. After college, she got into the prestigious Kirkland & Smith, the leading law firm in the country, and according to Forbes, the 3rd largest firm in the UK and US combined. Most of her classmates were jealous since she was earning almost triple what they were making in her first year alone. 2 months into the new job, Erica had already earned a name for herself. She was like the Bethany Horowitz at Kirkland & Ellis, small but dangerous. When she finally got home, she looked at her reflection in the mirror before she pulled out the pin that held her loose bun in place, letting her thick, luxurious brown hair flow on her shoulders. She grabbed the takeout boxes from Antonio's Grill and stepped out of the car. but when she saw her reflection in the driver's seat window, she frowned. She put the boxes on the car roof before she took off the jacket she had on, leaving her in a cream-colored pencil button-down knee-length dress. Braving the cold Vermont weather would definitely be worth it in a few minutes. She twisted her head to the side, wondering what to do to look a little sexier, not that she needed any help or anything. A button or two should do the trick, she thought, as she undid 2 buttons, and then a third. A smile played on her lips when she saw how perfect her cleavage looked. It was like looking at 2 amazingly perfect cushions on her chest. She grabbed her bag and the takeout boxes before she walked into the house. "Eli, babe, I'm home," she announced when she walked into the 3-bedroom house she shared with her fiancé. She looked around the living room and raised an eyebrow. There were 2 wine glasses and some Chinese takeout boxes. The TV was on, but there was no sign of Eli. She shook her head as she put her bag down and kicked off her shoes before she began clearing the table. This was classic Eli. He would always entertain his friends and forget or ignore to clean up. "Too bad you ruined your appetite. I brought us ravioli for dinner and you know what that means." "I won," she said excitedly as she walked the 2 glasses to the kitchen. She put her hands on the counter and wondered why Eli was not answering. A smile played on her lips when she realized that Eli must have been in the bathroom. He hated talking while on the can. He always said it was bad manners. But Erica could not wait to share her good news. She quickly made her way out of the kitchen and began walking down the hallway. But when she touched the doorknob, her heart skipped a beat. She saw a shoe outside her bedroom door, a shoe that didn't belong to her. She tried taking deep breaths as she walked towards her bedroom. There was no telling what she would find. Her mind was going crazy with all the different but possible scenarios waiting for her on the other side of the door. When she got there and pushed the door open, she gasped in anticipation, but all she saw was an empty bed. An empty, unmade bed. She looked around and blinked back tears when she saw a black satin skirt and a flowered blouse on the floor. She could hear the shower running in the bathroom, and the clothes on the floor, along with the unmade bed, told her more than she needed to know. But for some reason, she found herself slowly walking towards the bathroom. She wanted to stop herself, but for some crazy reason she couldn't. "Oh my God," she said in a low voice, when she opened the bathroom door and came face to face with a naked Eli who was pinning a naked woman to the bathroom wall. She opened her mouth to speak, but she was not sure what she was supposed to say. She gave him a disappointed look before she pulled off the princess-cut engagement ring and threw it at him. She spun on her heel and walked out of the bedroom, leaving Eli calling out to her, but she wasn't sure she wanted to hear anything he had to say. All she knew was that the wedding was off, and she could not stand being in that house a second longer. As the tears finally began rolling down her cheeks, Eli chased after her as she ran out to her car and started the engine. As she drove away, the red Prius parked opposite her house finally registered in her mind. She had seen it before, many times before, which meant that this, Eli's indiscretions, had been going on for a while. As she drove off, she could not help but wonder if he had cheated on her, because she was always busy working. "No, this has nothing to do with you, Erica. He made the choice to cheat because he didn't deserve you," she told herself as she drove off, but even those encouraging words were not enough to make her feel better about herself. The next thing she knew, Eli's stuff was gone from the house. He had moved out and moved on with his life without giving her as much as an explanation. And even though Erica knew she deserved an explanation, she didn't really want anything that reminded her of Eli's betrayal. Erica was staring at the ceiling with the sounds of Pierce Morgan in the background when she heard her apartment door open. She rolled her head to the side to see her sister Emily and her longtime friend Cassandra walking in. "That officially marks the last service provider canceled," Cassandra said as she sat down next to Erica. Thanks, guys. I couldn't have done this without you, Erica said, forcing out a smile. By the way, you should really lock up. The world is a dangerous place to be in nowadays, Emily said in a cheerful voice. Erica looked at her and shook her head. I literally live in a building practically owned by the police department, she said. That may have not been reason enough, but for her it was enough. It had always been enough knowing that 80% of her neighbors had firearms, legal firearms. Well, we came bearing gifts, Emily said, as she pulled out a bottle of champagne from the brown paper bag she was carrying. We pinched it from the caterer's van. I mean, they shouldn't get to keep everything, right? She asked. Yeah, they are keeping the security deposit, Cassandra said matter-of-factly. Erica looked at the two and shook her head. I hate to burst your bubble, guys, but you do know that bubbly is usually used for celebrating stuff, right? She asked. Emily and Cassandra looked at each other and smiled before Emily popped the bottle. Well, we are celebrating, Emily said. Erica raised an eyebrow. She wanted to ask what her sister meant, but she was too tired to let her brain work out the kinks. Well, you and Eli are officially over, and trust me, if ever there was a reason to celebrate, this is it, Emily added with a smile. Erica shook her head and grabbed the bottle from her sister before taking long gulps from the bottle. You do have glasses, right? Cassandra said as she held her long, dark hair up in a bun. Erica put the bottle down and stifled a burp. Well, Cassandra pressed. Erica rolled her eyes and walked to the kitchen. She caught a glimpse of the matching his and her mugs. Normally, she would have smiled and probably held Eli's cup in her hands, maybe even kissed it at some point. She sighed and dumped the two mugs in the trash, causing Cassandra and Emily to run into the kitchen. Are you okay? Cassandra asked when she and Emily walked in. Yeah, we heard something break, Emily said. Erica turned around and smiled at them. Never better. Emily looked inside the bin and smiled. I also thought a little spring cleaning could do this place some good, she said. Erica smiled and reached for the wine glasses. So what exactly are we drinking to? Erica asked as she leaned against the counter. Cassandra handed her a glass and smiled. There is the obvious reason, freedom from Eli, but then again, we could also just celebrate the fact that you never have to be in the same room with his family ever again, she said. Emily laughed and Erica nodded. Cassandra was right. One of the best things about her and Eli being over was never having to spend a day with Eli's judgmental family ever again. She raised her glass and took a long sip. You know what I don't get? Emily started as she looked through Erica's fridge. The fact that men get off so easily. Erica's eyes lit up when her sister said that. Funny. I was just thinking that before you guys came in, Erica started. When a high school girl gets pregnant, she has to take a year or two before she goes back to school. But the guy could very well be on to his next target, maybe even getting another teenager pregnant, she said. Cassandra looked into Erica's brown eyes. Is this really about some high school boy? She asked. Erica took another sip of her champagne and shook her head. No, it is about me dealing with all this crap while Eli is away having the time of his life with his boys and his new woman in Ibiza, she said. Maybe he should have been responsible for returning the wedding presents. It was brutal, she added. Emily shut the fridge door and looked at her sister. Hey, you know what? I am really proud of you, she said. Cousin Tricia would have most definitely gone ahead with the wedding just to make sure she wasn't embarrassed, she added with a smile. Yeah, she would have done that, wouldn't she? She laughed. Cassandra looked at them, a confused look on her face. Tricia? I have been friends with you two since senior year, and I think I would know of a Tricia given the fact that I have met most of your extended family, she said. Erica took another sip and nodded. Actually, you have met her, she said. Cassandra raised an eyebrow. 4 years ago at the Thanksgiving party. The pretentious light-skinned woman who was acting all diva-like, she added. Cassandra frowned. Oh, you are talking about Miss... I can't believe you don't have any salad at this party because everything is so fatty. That girl? She asked. Emily and Erica nodded. I always knew I didn't like her. Yeah, 2 years ago she paid someone to act as her boyfriend because she hated being the only one in the family who didn't have a man, Emily said. I guess I was too thrilled to tell her that my date was actually a gay friend, she added. Erica laughed. Yeah, I'm sure she is having a field day knowing that Eli and I called the wedding off, she said. You know she once had a thing for him, right? Does she have a thing for everyone? Cassandra asked, shaking her head. Emily and Erica looked at her. What the hell are you talking about? Emily asked. The guy I brought to the Thanksgiving party 4 years ago, Cassandra started. Yeah, that guy was amazing. Whatever happened between the two of you? What was his name anyway? CJ? DJ? Erica wondered as she played with a strand of her hair. JT, Cassandra said, wondering why Erica was throwing around random letters. He was cool and everything, but he had to move to Guam. Career choices and everything. So anyway, we've been keeping in touch over Facebook and stuff, but I always notice a Miss T posting on his wall. I didn't know who Miss T was at first, but when I checked her photo out, I remembered who she was. Really? What exactly does she say to him? Erica asked. Well, she is always asking if she can visit him in Guam and everything, Cassandra said, as the three of them walked back to the living room. Well, that's Trisha for you, Erica said, sitting back down. Emily and Cassandra sat down and looked at her. Erica noticed her phone ringing again and sighed. Need to get that? Emily asked. Erica shook her head. I really don't. It's a whole lot of apologies I can't handle, she said. Emily gave her an apologetic look. Don't give me that look. I'm okay. Actually, the way people are handling this whole thing is the main reason why I have to leave, Erica said as she looked at her sister. Emily shook her head and then shrugged. I'm just concerned. I mean, you have been talking of this trip for a week, and are you really sure this is what you want to do? I have never been so sure of anything in my life, she said with a smile. A change of scenery is exactly what I need to snap me back into reality. But what about your job? What did your boss say? Emily asked. Erica shrugged. I can't think of that right now. Besides, the guys at Kirkland and Ellis owe me. I haven't taken a day off in 2 years, she said in an authoritative tone. Besides, my bags are packed and I already bought my ticket, so there is no going back, she added. Cassandra topped up her glass and smiled. You're right, Boo. This is to a new start, she said as she raised her own glass. Erica smiled and raised her glass. To a new start, she said, before taking a sip. She could already see herself in her new start, with the wind blowing in her hair and the sand tickling her feet.
If you want more billionaire romances like this, please, my love, be sure to subscribe to the Romancely YouTube channel. I look forward to spending more time with you. Subscribe and let's make it happen.
Chapter 2. When Erica landed in Acapulco International Airport, she was already thanking her lucky stars that she had chosen Mexico over Hawaii for her first destination. The weather was perfect and the people were all too friendly. For the first time in a long time, she was happy she was not on the receiving end of people's pitiful stares. It had been months since she and Eli broke up, 6 months to be exact, but people were still looking at her like she had come to the end of herself. When she checked into her room, she took a long nap before hunger pains woke her up. She considered having room service, but when she looked at the time, she realized that what was initially supposed to be a short nap had actually turned out to be a 6-hour rest. She got out of bed and sent a quick text to her sister to let her know that she got to Acapulco safely. After that, she took a long shower and then changed into a spaghetti-strapped peacock maxi dress that showed off her perfect curves. She then straightened out her hair and put on some light makeup and some gold-hooped earrings. A smile played on her lips when she saw her reflection. It had been a long time since she put on a maxi dress. Thanks to Vermont weather, she rarely ever got a chance to wear anything sleeveless without a coat. She put on some pink lip gloss and then picked up her purse before she walked out of her room. She could not help but notice just how perfectly tanned the hotel guests were. Or are they locals and I just had a racist thought? She wondered as she rode in the elevator. When she got to the first floor, she made her way to the restaurant and took a seat with a beautiful beach view. So is it lunch or breakfast? She wondered as she looked at her phone. 3 p.m. A really, really late breakfast. She was still looking at her menu when a waiter walked up to her carrying a glass of fresh pineapple juice. "I'm sorry, I didn't order this," she said as she looked at the waiter. "Complimentary drink for all our guests, miss," the waiter said with a smile. Erica looked up at him and smiled. She couldn't help but notice the boyish telenovela star vibe. "The hotel also has a pineapple venture," the waiter added. "Thanks," Erica said as she held the cold glass and lifted it to her lips. "This is really good," she said when she put the glass down. The waiter smiled in appreciation. 3 years serving that, and I am yet to get a disappointed customer," he said. Erica smiled and took another sip. "I'll have the chicken fajita," she said, but she wasn't sure that would be enough. She was famished. "Could I also have a side of salsa and chips?" she asked. The waiter scribbled something on his pad and nodded before he walked away. She took another long sip of her juice and looked up just in time to see a perfectly toned, muscled man walking into the restaurant. "Damn," she thought as she looked at him. He was in a pair of white linen pants and a light blue shirt. Even though the shirt was buttoned all the way down, she could see the perfect muscular structure. She could almost picture it in her head. The man had perfect dark wavy hair, and Erica had to admit, he was the hottest man she had ever seen. When the man began walking towards her, she realized she had been staring and looked away. She took another sip of her juice and tried as much as she could not to make eye contact with him. "Oh, come on," she thought when the man took a seat right next to her. She thanked her lucky stars that she had a seat with a view, otherwise she would have been stuck staring at an amazingly hot guy. She was still looking at the beautiful scenery below when the waiter came back with her order. "Thank you so much. Please charge this to my room," she said as she inhaled the rich aroma. She was trying hard not to moan when she took her first bite. It was simply heavenly. "I am surprised I can't hear pleasure sounds coming out of you right now," the man seated at the table next to hers said. She turned around, dabbing the sides of her mouth where the food was threatening to mess up. "I beg your pardon?" Erica asked. "That's the fajita, right? When I first had it, I was with a few board members, and the whole restaurant thought we were having a sexual experience or something," the man said. Erica smiled and then laughed. "Cute and funny," she thought. "Well, maybe I was trying to make sure I don't get branded a pervert on my first day in Acapulco," she added. "First day, huh?" He looked at her and smiled. She nodded. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. Erica almost jumped up in joy. "Sure," she said before taking another bite. "Sorry, my manners, Erica Hayes," she said when she swallowed. "Daniel Reese," he said. She looked at her hands and smiled. "I would shake your hand, but maybe we can do that in an hour or something?" she asked. He smiled and nodded. Erica took a tortilla chip and dipped it in salsa before she took a bite. "Would you like some?" she asked. Daniel frowned and Erica followed suit. "Come on, don't be a baby," she said. Daniel smiled and then reached for a chip before he dipped it in the salsa. "That's good," he said as he chewed. "Really good," he said as he reached for another tortilla. 3 years I have been coming here and I have never thought of ordering this," he said. Erica raised an eyebrow. I have to ask, what nationality are you? She asked. American, why? Are you trying to tell me that you've never had tortillas? She asked in surprise. Well, I don't like admitting it in public, but I have actually never had any. Daniel shrugged. Erica's eyes grew wide. Given the look on your face right now, I can assume that you are genuinely surprised, he said. She nodded and took a bite of her fajita. I am, she said before taking another bite. Why, I don't think it's that weird, he said. Actually, it is just as strange as a Chinese man never having had rice in his life. Erica looked at him and smiled. Okay, when you put it like that, I sound like an absolute snob, Daniel said. The waiter who had served her earlier came carrying a tray and stopped at their table. Thank you, Emilio, he said as the waiter put a plate in front of him coupled with a glass of pineapple juice. I see you already had a taste of this glass of heaven, he said before taking a long sip from his glass. Erica smiled and took a sip from her own glass. It is perfect, she said. I have been having a glass every single day since I got here. I don't know what I am going to do when I go back home. I mean, you can never get something this good and authentic back at home, he said. Erica looked at him and raised an eyebrow. Just how long have you been here? 14 days and counting. Wow, any plans of going back time anytime soon? Oh, Erica, are you already bored with me? It's only been a few minutes, he teased. She smiled and shook her head. No, please don't get me wrong. It's nothing like that. It's just that you look like a venture capitalist kind of person, and such guys usually have a few weeks every 50 years to take a vacation, she said. He took a bite of his paella rice before he looked up at her. I'm sorry, venture capitalist, whatever gave me away, he asked as he looked at her. Well, you might be in linen pants, but I work with suits all day. I know exactly what an Armani shirt looks like, she said. Daniel looked at her and nodded. He looked seemingly impressed. Okay, now I have to ask what you do, he said. Erica took another bite and shrugged. I was a lawyer, 2 years, she said before taking another bite. Was? Did you change your mind about law or something? He asked. Erica took a long, deep breath and shook her head. Honestly, I don't really know. I gave my resignation to my boss before I took this trip, she said. The trip is actually supposed to help me make up my mind about a lot of things. Daniel nodded and took another bite of his paella. So, what about you? Was I right about you, Mr. Venture Capitalist? She asked. Actually, I am what you can call an innovator, or at least my team is. He smiled. What is that supposed to mean? She asked. Daniel reached for his wallet and pulled out a business card. He looked at it for a few minutes before he handed it to Erica. Quicker Kitchen Me? The microwave guys? She asked. Daniel smiled and nodded. Wait, CEO? You run QKM? She asked, almost too surprised. You know about the company? He asked. Are you kidding? If you saw my kitchen, you would probably have me as your poster child, she said with a smile. Well, you see, you were really wrong about me being a venture capitalist, he said. Actually, unless you do the actual groundwork in your company, I really don't think you are anything other than a venture capitalist, she said, as she took one last bite of her food. Daniel was smiling, almost grinning. How did you ever get your law degree if you can't even know the right definition of venture capitalist? He asked. She looked at him and shrugged before reaching for her glass. How do you know that all this is not just an act? She asked, looking at him over the rim of her glass. Daniel looked at her perfectly round brown eyes and shook his head. Yes, how do I know? He said. She looked at him and took one last sip of her juice before putting the glass down. I guess you will never know, she said as she dabbed her mouth with her napkin. Leaving already? He asked as he looked at him. Well, I am done with my lunch or really late breakfast, she said as she looked at him. I would really like to see you again, he said. She looked at him and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Are you staying here at this hotel? she asked. Daniel nodded. Good, then I'll see you for breakfast tomorrow, she said as she walked out of the restaurant. She could almost feel Daniel's eyes on her as she made her way out. You came here to get away from everything, not to start a fling. That was the thought running in her mind, but somehow she pushed the thought to the back of her mind. When she got to her room, she could not wait to talk to her sister. When she finally turned the corner, Erica was practically running to the elevator. She had tried as hard as she could to maintain her femininity for as long as she thought Daniel was watching, before she finally broke into her real self. She was breathing hard and deep as she waited for the elevator to stop at her floor. She was drumming her fingers against the side of her thigh as she hummed a familiar tune. She didn't even realize that she was riding the elevator with 2 more people. Oh God, I'm so sorry, she said when she came to her senses. The man and woman in the elevator smiled and shrugged. You sure do look happy, the woman said. I am. For the first time in a long time, I really am. Erica smiled and then shrugged. Well, that's what life's all about, right? The man pointed out as the elevator doors opened. Erica smiled at them politely before she walked out. She tried hard not to smile as she passed a few more hotel guests along the hallway. When she got inside her room, she tossed her purse somewhere as she headed for one of her bags. She pulled out her iPad and checked her connection as she sat on the bed. As soon as she established a connection, she smiled when she saw her sister was online. She dialed her and waited for her to pick up. Hey, you, she said when Emily picked up. Hey, what's wrong with your connection? Emily asked. What do you mean? She frowned as she looked at her screen. I can't see you, that's what's wrong, Emily said. Wait, I think I know what's going on. Hold up, she said in a low voice as she tapped on the enable video icon. There, she said, sitting back. Better, and oh, someone looks excited, Emily said with a smile. I kind of am, but I first want to hear about you. You look like you are still in the office, she said. Emily looked around her office and shrugged. Yeah, I guess the work is never really done, she said. Those guys don't pay you enough, Erica said. Emily smiled. I know, right? Sometimes I think that maybe I should have gone into law like you did, she added. Erica frowned and shook her head. What? You don't think I would crack it? Come on, Ems, you have always been the money guy. Accounts are like sex to you. You would never walk away if your life depended on it. You know, kind of what I did, Erica said. You know, I've been meaning to ask, are you sure that is what you really want? To just walk away from everything? Emily looked at her and smiled. Yeah, maybe I will rethink everything in the long run, but the truth is that right now this is all I want. To just be away from everything. Erica shrugged. I'm fine, I promise you, she added with a smile. Emily ran her fingers through her hair and sighed. I'm happy if you're happy, sweetie, she said. Erica looked at her sister and smiled. If she could, she would have reached right through the screen and kissed her sister. Sometimes Emily acted like she was the older one, and Erica adored her for it. So, why are you so happy anyway? I mean, I know that you are on vacation and everything, and that being happy is kind of part of the package, but you are a little glowy, Emily noted. Erica tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Okay, I'm not glowing, but if you must know, I met a guy. Erica grinned. Wait, didn't you just land today? Emily asked. From the tone in her sister's voice, she could tell that Emily was impressed. Yes, I did, and I blacked out. I was too tired, but as it turns out, the decision not to have room service was what led to me meeting a fine gentleman in the restaurant, Erica said excitedly. I didn't understand any of that, Emily frowned. Okay, I wanted to have room service, you know, with the exhaustion and everything, but I remembered that time we went to Puerto Vallarta and didn't get out of the room for most of the vacation so long. Story short, I ended up going downstairs and bam, I met the guy. And get this, he is hot, she said excitedly. Emily smiled at her sister. "So what was this, just a one-time meal, or is there something else in the future?" she asked. Erica shrugged as she thought of the look Daniel had given her as she left the restaurant. She was not sure, but years of working with other men making huge settlements had taught her that she could read men quite well, and the way Daniel had looked at her spoke volumes. "We are definitely going to have something else," Erica said just as she heard Emily's office door open and close. "Are you busy?" she asked when she saw Emily look up from her computer. "Yeah, I just got this stack of paperwork. Something to do with last month's financials. Talk tomorrow?" "Maybe, but if I don't, I'll get some time later this week," she shrugged. "I have a good feeling of what you'll be doing," Emily said before she hung up. Erica rolled her eyes. She didn't get enough time to tell her sister not to mention anything to Cassandra. Emily had a thing for always exaggerating, and given a choice, she would have loved to be the one to break the news to Cassandra. She shrugged and put away her iPad. Maybe she would take care of that later, much, much later.
Chapter 3. Needless to say, Erica was a little keener to detail when she dressed up the next morning. She had initially planned on wearing a sundress, but she also wanted to check out the pool later, or maybe the beach. "Maybe I'll just wear a swimsuit," she thought as she picked out a lime green bikini from her suitcase. She oiled herself and put it on before putting on a striped black and white swimwear cover-up. She held her hair in a high bun and put on a pair of silver dangling earrings and a pair of black flip-flops before she looked at her reflection in the mirror. She put on some light makeup and then looked at her phone and sighed. It was 9 o'clock. She didn't want to look like she was just going there with the intention of bumping into Daniel, but she also didn't want to miss out on seeing him. She bit her lower lip and touched up on her blush and lipstick before she headed out. She didn't know whether it was the adventurous pink lipstick or the fact that she was almost completely naked under her cover-up, but she felt a little more confident than usual. But her confidence suddenly vanished when the elevator doors opened and she came face to face with Daniel. "If I didn't know any better, I would think you are stalking me," was what she initially wanted to say, but when she opened her mouth, she could only mumble. She hated knowing that he could have such an effect on her. "Daniel, hi," she said as she walked in. She was hoping that he didn't notice how hot he looked in his neutral pants and dark blue t-shirt. His muscular chest was almost calling out to her. It was then that she knew it was official. The dry spell was getting to her. "Erica, fancy meeting you here?" Daniel said, looking at her. "You look about ready to hit the pool," he added as he looked at her up and down. "Maybe after breakfast," she said with a smile. "Sleep well?" he asked as she pressed one of the elevator buttons. She looked at him and nodded. "Like a baby," she said with a smile. Daniel nodded as a smile played on his lips. "You know, I never really understood why people compared a good night's sleep to a baby since babies wake up every 10 minutes, he said. She looked at him and shrugged. "Guess I don't blame you. You found the metaphor in use. I guess no one can blame you for continuing the trend," he added as the elevator door opened. She looked at him before she stepped out with him following closely. "Do you always make people feel bad about their upbringing?" Erica asked with a smile. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" he started before she turned around and looked at him. Hey, I was just kidding," she said with a smile. "I was kidding." "You almost got me there," he said, grinning. He looked around and pointed at a private table in the corner of the restaurant. "That looks good enough," he said as he led her to the table. "Are you always this charming with ladies, or are you just doing this for me because you are intrigued?" she asked as she sat down in the chair Daniel had pulled out for her. He took a seat on the opposite end of the table and looked at her. "Intrigued? Why intrigued?" he asked. "Well, I could be the first woman who actually knew what your company was," she said. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "At least I think the geek in me thinks so," she added quickly. "Actually, yes. You are the first person who knew almost immediately what the words quicker kitchen me meant. Most people think I am just a weirdo putting random words together, he said. Erica smiled and then laughed. Yeah, that's what I get for having my dad get my cousin to be the face of quicker kitchen me, he added in a rather cynical tone. I'm sorry, Mr. Reese, but is that cynicism I hear in your voice? She asked. He leaned back in his seat as he toyed with the menu. A little, he said as he looked at the menu. Apparently Zachary had the charisma the company needed to make the brand pop, he said, putting up air quotes. I'm guessing you would have wanted to be part of the advertising campaign at some point? She asked. He looked up and nodded. Well, where is your cousin Zachary now? She asked. Last I checked, he was a bouncer at a club in Vegas, he said almost proudly. She smiled at him and raised an eyebrow. See, you turned out better than he did, right? She said as Emilio walked up to them. Hi, Emilio. Can I have coffee? Black with scrambled eggs and pancakes? She asked. Daniel looked at her and raised an eyebrow. Really? You are away from home and you still want to play it safe with food? He asked, holding his hand up, stopping Emilio before he could scribble the order on his notepad. What are you talking about? She asked. Scrambled eggs and pancakes? How very American of you. Try something different. I don't know, Mexican maybe? He asked. She looked up at him and shrugged. Allow me, he said, before he looked at Emilio. We'll have the eggs, black beans, guacamole pico de gallo with Greek yogurt, he said, as Emilio jotted it down. And some coffee for me and... He looked at Erica. Orange juice, thank you, Erica said, as Emilio jotted it down and walked away. Before I even ask my next question, is Emilio the only waiter here? She asked. I like him. He is the one who usually serves me, plus he kind of gets me, he said. So, what do you have in mind? What was your question? It's about the food. Do you always eat something local every time you visit a new country? She asked. One time I was in Singapore and one of my business partners ordered me a sambal stingray dish. It sounds great, but when you look at it, it's like a bunch of ingredients slapped on a banana leaf, but it is heavenly, he said. You make it sound like it is some disgusting thing, she frowned. Well, when you look at it, you might be inclined to throw it out, but the first taste is truly everything, he said, a faraway look in his eyes. He almost looked like he was reliving a romantic moment. She smiled and shook her head. Trust me, Erica Hayes, you need to live a little, he added in a low voice. What makes you think I haven't lived at all? Daniel leaned in and a few strands of his thick mane fell out of place. He looked at her through the hair strands and smiled. Something about you tells me that there is more to this trip than you are letting on, he said. Are you a mind reader now, Mr. Reese? She leaned back in her seat and forced a smile. He looked at her and smiled. Maybe, he said in a low voice. She looked into his eyes and shrugged. Maybe you are reading into the wrong things, she said, as Emilio came back with their order. Daniel smiled at her as Emilio put their food on the table. You are going to make me work for the intel, aren't you? He asked. She took a sip of her juice and looked at her plate. She had to admit, it did look inviting. She put the glass down slowly and picked up a fork. You have no idea, she said before she took a bite. Oh, my dear Lord, this is actually really good, she said, taking another bite. Daniel smiled as he took a bite of his own food. Hate to say I told you so, but I told you so, he said with a cocky smile. So, Erica started as she looked at him. What is the story with you anyway? I just met you less than 24 hours ago, and all I know is that you run a company of home appliances and that you probably came out here for business and decided to stay on an impromptu extended vacation. She took another bite and looked up at him. Daniel looked at her and smiled. There isn't much to me, really. I run a company my father founded, and I have learned the hard way that every so often I have to make a little time for my personal time. And maybe that's why I decided to take a few extra days after the deal closed," he said. She looked at him and raised an eyebrow. "Now I have to ask," she said. He looked at her, and she smiled. "And I know how ridiculously hypocritical I sound right now." "Okay, I will bite," he said as he took a sip of his coffee. "This time," he added. "That's more like it," she said with a smile. "Okay, this is what happened. I was trying to make everything work out, at work and at home, and I guess I somehow leaned too much into the corporate and forgot all about life at home. So one day I got back home from work and I was all alone," he said. "I waited for a few weeks and my girlfriend didn't show up and she wasn't answering my calls either. I just put two and two together when she came as my business partner's date to one of my parents' events." He took a bite of his food and looked up at her. "So that's the story of my life. The sad, lonely story of my life," he added as he looked up at her. She took a sip of her juice and smiled sadly. "Your story is really sad. Does it get you laid much?" she asked as she took another bite. Daniel smiled and then laughed. "What would make you say something like that?" "Well, I have worked with enough big players to know that Rolex on your wrist is the real deal, and you are a good-looking man, a rich good-looking man. So there is no way you can convince me that you have never dropped that story just to get laid," she said. Daniel looked into her intense brown eyes and smiled. "Well, I might have gotten a pity lay one too many times, but believe me, I have never told that story to anyone before. At least not with that intention," he said. She raised an eyebrow and smiled at him. "Aha! So you have told that story before, haven't you?" she asked with sly smile. "Maybe I have, but enough about me. What about you?" he asked as he looked at her. Her gaze dropped as she toyed with her food. She was not sure she was ready to open up yet. It had taken a really long time to even open up to two of her closest people, her sister and Cassandra. She took a long, deep breath and looked up. "It's that bad, huh?" he asked. "To be honest, it's really that bad plus a whole lot of shit on top," she said as she looked at him. She shook her head and then looked up. "But it's kind of almost the same thing as your story," she added. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "So you let work get the better of you too?" he asked. Not exactly, but there was no way around this. She had no more words to express herself. She looked up at him and smiled. She didn't know what it was about him that made her feel so safe with him. Normally, she wouldn't have said anything to a man she barely knew, but she suddenly had an urge to pour her heart out. "I trusted someone, a lot, and he hurt me," she said in a low voice. "A lot," she added as she looked down at her plate. Daniel looked at her and suddenly felt guilty for making her open up. "Hey, I'm sorry, I really didn't mean to make you revisit a painful past," he said. "Don't be, it's not your fault," she smiled. "Yes, it is," he said as he reached for one of her hands. "Believe me, I honestly didn't mean to make you relive a painful past," he said in a soft voice. "Water under the bridge," she shrugged as she looked at him. She pulled her hand away from his and took a bite of her food. She then took a long sip of her juice before she put the glass down. She couldn't help but notice the sad look Daniel was giving her. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said in a low voice. "Really? Because you are looking at me like some kind of porcelain doll about to be run over by a truck," she said with a smile. "Where do you get your metaphors from?" he laughed. "I don't know. I just say whatever feels right," she said, taking another bite. "Clearly," he said as he looked at her. "But anyway, apart from the sob story, I have one sister, a twin Emily, fraternal, not identical, and my best friend Cassandra. They are the two most important people in my life," she went on as she toyed with her food. "We have a younger brother, though sometimes we feel like he is the older one, and that's that about my family. Oh wait, there is my mom and dad, some crazy telenovela story there. That's it, she said almost excitedly. Okay, that's a whole lot about your family. Maybe you should try and see if you can match it. All right. I have one sister, Melanie. Needless to say, she is my world. She is 5 years younger than me, and she always acts like she is an adult, but she will always be my baby sister. You know, kind of like the situation you guys have with your brother. And then there is my dad, and we get along quite well despite the whole Zachary incident when I was younger. And I guess that's that, he said. She looked at him and wondered where all this was going and how it had started. I should have mentioned my best friend Vince, he added. He looked at her and she laughed. She had no idea where all this was going. That is the quickest I have ever got to know anyone, she said as she looked at him. Me too, Daniel said. She put her fork down and looked at him. So what now? He asked. She shrugged as she dabbed a napkin on her mouth. I don't know about you, but I am going to chill out by the pool, she said. Daniel frowned. What? She asked when she noticed his frown. You do know that after meals you are supposed to take at least an hour before swimming, right? He said. She raised an eyebrow. Yes, I know, but I didn't say I am going to take a dip in the pool. I'm just going to get a tan. He took a deep breath and put his fork down. I have a better idea, he said as he pushed his seat back from the table. She looked at him and raised an eyebrow. Come on, he said as he offered his hand to her. She looked up at him and wondered why she was so trusting of him, but for some reason she just put her hand in his and stood up. You do realize that I have a swimsuit on, right? She asked. Don't worry, the place we're going doesn't really require much of a dress code, he said as they started walking towards the door. She suddenly stopped and looked at him. Are you taking me to a nude beach or something? She asked. You're adorable. He smiled as they walked out of the restaurant. She could feel her stomach knotting up as they walked through the hotel lobby. She didn't know why she was getting all kinds of weird feelings with him. She could feel the excitement building up as she walked out of the main doors. She smiled at the doorman as he held the door open for her. She put on her sunglasses and crossed her arms over her chest as Daniel waved down a cab. He looked at her and held the door open for her. She gave him an appreciative smile and climbed in. She looked at him as he walked round the car and climbed in next to her. La Quebrada, please, he said to the driver before he strapped himself in. You do know I am being an idiot for getting into a car with a stranger, right? She asked. Well, I don't know how many strangers know such intimate details about each other, he said. She smiled and turned to look out the window. You don't have much to say now, huh? I'm keeping my comments to myself, she said. Trust me, you are going to love La Quebrada, he said with a smile. She looked at him and flashed him a smile that reached out to parts of him he didn't think possible. I better, she said in a flirtatious voice, even though she never intended to.
Chapter 4. Daniel was right. La Quebrada was more than what she expected it to be. It was the kind of place that you expect to see on a postcard. She was just in awe of the place. Everything about it was perfect in more ways than one. Thanks to her job, she hadn't been out in a long time, and even Daniel could tell she was excited. Someone really needed to have this vacation, didn't she? He asked. She looked at him as they walked along the beach and shrugged. It has been a while. I almost feel like a kid taking a first-time trip to Disneyland, she added as they came to a stop. Come on this way, he said, leading her up a sandy trail. Trust me on this, Erica, he said in a soft voice as he took her hand in his. She sighed and followed him up the trail, which brought them to a beautiful private rocky area. Erica was not sure what he had in mind or where he was taking her. As they slowly climbed up and down the rocks, Erica found herself wondering whether this was what she had always had in mind when she pictured a perfect getaway. She gasped when they finally came to a small private pool enclosed by rocks. There was a canopy of trees hanging over one side of the rocks, giving the rocky resort a perfect shade. "Wow," Erica said under her breath as she looked around. "I know, right?" he said, looking around. She smiled and walked up to one of the rocks and sat down. He walked up to where she was and took a seat next to her. "I take it you've been here before," she said without looking at him. Daniel nodded as he looked around. "Yeah, this has always been my small slice of Acapulco. Maybe the reason why I keep coming back here," he pointed out. "I don't know why, but I have always found some kind of peace when I was here. I guess this must be a very sacred place for you," she said. He nodded and then turned to look at her. "You know what? I have never brought anyone back here. You are the first." She smiled and shrugged. "And they say you never forget your first, right?" she asked. He laughed as he looked at her and nodded. "Yes, they do," he said in a soft voice. There was a long silence as the two of them looked at each other. Even with her sunglasses on, Erica could feel his piercing hazel eyes looking into her. She suddenly looked away when she felt her cheeks flush. She could still feel him looking at her. "Oh, damn, Erica, you're blushing. Don't let him see you blushing," she thought as she looked around the perfect scenery. She suddenly took off her sunglasses and her cover-up dress before she stood up and stepped out of her flip-flops. Daniel looked at her curvy body as she looked at the water. She could have sworn she heard him breathe a long, low wow when he saw her in her swimsuit. "Is this a safe depth to dive in?" she asked without turning around. "Yes, it is," he said just minutes before she jumped into the water head first. She swam a few laps before she finally came up. Her bun, which had now come undone, was framing her face. She looked at him and smiled. "Are you coming in?" "The water's great," she said. He smiled and shook his head. "What? You bring me out here in the middle of nowhere and you can't even indulge me?" she asked. He laughed and rested his weight on his hands. "But I have no swimsuit." "You have some boxers on or something?" Erica asked, and he nodded. "Well, that's good enough for me," she said before she floated on her back, giving him a perfect view of her curvy body. Her hair was floating around her head like a perfect dark cloud. "Why, Miss Hayes, are you flirting with me?" he teased. "If I said I was, would you come in?" she asked with a smile. He stood up and began unbuttoning his shirt. He could almost feel himself getting hard with every button that came undone. He did not understand the kind of hold this woman had on him, but seeing her floating in the clear blue water with her crotch and breasts covered in the bright lime green fabric was more than enough to get a rise out of him. He then went ahead and took off his pants before he jumped in the water. Erica dove down and swam to one side trying to get away from him, but he followed her. He got really close to her and smiled. "What else don't I know about you?" he asked. She shook her head and shrugged. "I don't know," she said in a low voice. "Really? Because I feel like there is something more you are holding out on," he said. She waved her arms around in the water and looked at him. I don't know what to say," she said as he moved even closer to her, as if he was not already close enough. She could almost feel the warmth of his body even in the cold water. He looked at her, and Erica felt her cheeks get warm again. She was blushing again, and this time she was a bit too close to him. She turned around and swam away from him. "So we are racing now?" she heard him asking before he followed her to one end of the pool. "What is this, Erica? Why can't you get your act together around this guy?" she wondered as she swam back to their point of origin. When she surfaced, she saw him following closely. "I'm sorry if I'm a little fast. Swimming is the only kind of exercise I have been getting for the last 2 years," she said. "I can tell," Daniel said as she pulled herself out of the water. Daniel followed suit and sat next to her. "I have to ask," she started as she squeezed the water out of her hair. "Why is this place special to you?" Daniel shrugged and took a long, deep breath before he shook his head. I'm not really sure. All I know is that I love being here. It's nice and quiet and private, he said in almost a whisper. She smiled and nodded. She totally understood. This was like his Hollywood sign. The first time I went to Hollywood, I found myself in the Hollywood sign, she started. Daniel turned and looked at her, raising an eyebrow. In? He asked. She smiled and nodded. I thought that place is restricted. It is, but I was in the company of some crazy people and there was a lot of alcohol involved. Let's just say I have no idea how everything happened. All I know is that it did, and to date, I still take the hike, even though the authorities say that it is a risk, she said with a smile. It is my special place, she added as she looked at him. Daniel looked into her big brown eyes and smiled at her. He felt drawn to her as she was to him. It was almost like there was some kind of chemistry between them. He shifted his weight, getting himself closer to where she was. Somehow I feel like we are a kindred spirit, he said in a low voice. She nodded and forced a smile. Yeah, kindred spirits, she echoed as he got even closer to her. She wanted to move away, but there was some kind of magnet holding her in place. She couldn't move. She could feel her heart beating hard as he brought his face closer to her. Almost too close. She was almost in a panic as she felt his warm breath on her cheek. But even then, she didn't move away. She closed her eyes when she felt his lips brushing against hers in a soft, slow kiss. This would have been the first kind of male attention she had received in almost 7 months, and it was doing things to her body she never thought possible. When he finally pulled away, she was almost a mess. She was like butter in his hands. He would have done anything with her, and she would have let him. It was almost a full minute when she finally got the courage to pull away from him. She had her eyes closed and her cheeks were flushed. I'm sorry, she stammered. She was not very sure what she was sorry for, but she knew that it was probably not a good idea for her to be there. No need to be, I should be the one apologizing, Daniel said as he looked at her. Erica's eyes were darting to and fro as she wondered what she was supposed to do next. She didn't know the way back to the beach. She reached for her cover-up and put it on, making Daniel wonder whether he should have taken a few more minutes before he moved in for the kill. I'm really sorry. He started, but she was already on her feet putting on her flip-flops. Her wet body was already clinging to the cover-up, making her curse herself for jumping in the water in the first place. This was a bad idea, she muttered under her breath as she looked around. A really, really bad idea. She was now trying to retrace her steps, but it was like her mind was blank. She couldn't make out what was happening. She just wanted to be away from that place. After all, it was his place. Are you okay? Daniel asked as he stood up. To him, she looked like a confused woman who had just woken up in some strange man's bed. Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how we came up here. She nodded and looked around. Daniel grabbed his shirt and put it on. I'll show you, he said. No, Erica said a little too loudly, surprising even herself. I'm sorry, She started as Daniel pulled his pants on. She looked at him and put on her sunglasses. There is no way you can find your way back to the beach without my help, Erica, Daniel said as he zipped up his pants. He felt strange putting on his clothes with his wet boxers. He knew that by the time they got to the beach, he would look like he peed himself, but he didn't care at this point. He had never seen anyone this agitated. If he knew this was going to happen, he would have never asked her up here, let alone kiss her. Unlike the walk up to the pool, the walk back to the beach was surprisingly quiet. When they finally got to the beach, Daniel looked at Erica and asked if he could call a cab. No, I'll just go, she said before walking off, leaving him standing there stunned. The cab station is this way, Daniel called out as he looked at her. Erica stopped in her tracks and turned around. She walked up to where Daniel was, and he was trying as hard as he possibly could not to laugh as he pointed her to the direction of the cabs. It went without saying that Erica wished she could just fly out of there. Throughout the drive back to the hotel, Erica was cursing herself for being so vulnerable. She hated that she was so weak in Daniel's presence. Or was it that all that time she had stayed celibate was actually catching up with her? She was breathing hard and deep as she walked into her room. She walked to the bathroom and grabbed a towel before she collapsed on the bed. She was cursing herself for more than 1,000 reasons. What the hell were you thinking? She wondered as she looked at the ceiling. At this rate, you could have very well let the mailman feel you up. She shook her head and got up from the bed before she walked to the bathroom. She turned on the water and stripped off her swimwear before she stepped into the water. She closed her eyes and ran her fingers through her wet hair as the water ran down her body. She wanted to talk to someone, needed to talk to someone, but knowing her sister, Emily would have probably loved the whole thing. After a shower that took almost an hour, she stepped out of the bathroom and toweled herself up before she sat in front of the mirror. She took a long, deep breath as she dried her hair out, every minute wondering why she was feeling like such a mess. Maybe I am just being too hard on myself, she thought. But then she brushed the thought off. That was exactly what Emily would have said. Cassandra would have probably come down to Acapulco to slap the silly out of her, because according to her, Erica was trying to live her life down rather than living it up. She looked at her phone and shrugged. She was starving and she couldn't bear to go downstairs in case she bumped into Daniel. She didn't know why, but she couldn't face him. Maybe it was the embarrassment she felt, or the way she just felt downright dumb for allowing herself to be so defenseless with him. She walked over to the bed and called the front desk. "Hi, I'd like to order in," she said as she leaned against the bed rest. "Can I have some fries and a double cheeseburger?" she asked. She could almost hear Daniel's voice telling her how predictably American she was being with her food. "Sure, Miss Hayes. Would you like a drink with that?" the guy at the reception asked. She took a minute and shrugged. "No, I'll just have something from the minibar," she said. "Actually, cancel the burger. Get me some wings instead," she added. "Of course, Miss Hayes," the receptionist said before she thanked him and hung up. She looked around and walked over to the dressing table. She slowly oiled up as she replayed the events of that afternoon. She could still feel the warm tingle of his lips on hers. She looked at her reflection as she let the towel drop to the seat. As she oiled her torso, she couldn't help but feel sad for herself. This was the only kind of contact she'd had in the last 7 months that came anything close to intimacy. She found herself wondering why she had not heeded Cassandra's advice and got a sex toy. Maybe she wouldn't be feeling this silly and/or horny if only she had taken matters into her own hands. She walked to the closet and pulled out a pair of blue tights and a white t-shirt. She pulled on the t-shirt and then put on some black panties before she put on the tights. She was about to walk back to the bed and see what was on TV when she heard a knock on the door. They definitely work fast in this hotel, she thought as she walked to the door. She had a smile on her face as she opened the door. "You most definitely deserve a generous tip for." Her voice trailed off when she saw Daniel outside her door. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" she asked in a low voice. "Can I come in?" he asked, smiling at her. She took a moment before taking a step to the side, allowing him in. "So, what exactly do I deserve a tip for?" he asked as she closed the door. She pushed a strand of hair out of the way and shrugged. "I ordered room service a few minutes ago," she said as she led him to her bed. She looked at him and shrugged. "Why are you here?" she asked as she looked at him. As soon as the words left her lips, she knew that she was being a little rude. She closed her eyes and shook her head. "I'm sorry, She started before he sat down. "I'm here to apologize," he said as he looked up at her. She crossed her arms on her chest and shook her head. "You don't have to," she said as she looked at him. "It is as much." Her voice trailed off. She wanted to say that it was as much her fault as it was his, but somehow she couldn't bring herself to saying that. She would be admitting to him that she wanted him to kiss her. You don't have to, she said again. I guess I just don't know why I suddenly feel so drawn to you, so free with you, he said. Erica looked at him and tried not to smile. There is something you need to know, he said without looking at her. The girl I told you about, my girlfriend, ex-girlfriend. It happened almost 3 years ago, and since then I have been taking these trips around the world trying to figure myself out. But every time I get close to someone, I always feel like there should be something more, like I'm never really completed. Erica wasn't very sure where he was going with this. She looked at him and shook her head. Daniel? She started as she looked at him. He shook his head and stood up. No? Don't. I'm trying to explain myself, he said as he took a step towards her. She looked up at him and wondered what he was going to say next. She was trying as hard as she could not to get too close to him, but even then, she couldn't deny what was happening between them. She opened her mouth to talk, but a knock on the door interrupted her. She turned around and walked to the door and opened it. It was her food, finally. She smiled as the hotel employee wheeled her food into the room. She walked to where she had tossed her purse and looked through for any kind of local currency. She shook her head when she noticed that she didn't have anything local and then pulled out a $20 bill from her wallet and handed it to the waiter before she closed the door. She didn't know what happened next. All she knew was that 1 minute she was closing the door and the next minute she was pinned against the door by his body. She gasped into his mouth as he kissed her deeply, his lips crushing hers.
Oh no, this adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Premium members. Check the description below to sign up. The love scene reference is Her Next Man's a Billionaire, Chapter 4, Love Scene 1.
What the hell is wrong with you, Erica? You are already playing out domestic fantasies in your head with a man you barely know, she thought. A man you barely know. The words were echoing in her head. Barely know. Suddenly, Erica sat up. It was as if something had been switched on, snapping her back to reality. This was not her. This was not in her playbook. Maybe Daniel not having the condoms with him was some kind of sign. Shit, she thought as she climbed off the bed. She grabbed her clothes from the floor and quickly pulled them on just as Daniel walked back in. Okay, I'm back. Where were we? He started as he closed the door behind him. His voice trailed off when he saw a fully dressed Erica. What's going on? He asked as he walked towards her. Erica knew the kind of hold he had on her and she couldn't let him get so close. She took a step back and crossed her arms over her chest. Daniel, I think this was a mistake, she said in a low voice. Why? 3 minutes ago, you wanted me as much as I wanted you. What changed? He asked as he looked at her. Maybe not having the condoms with you was some kind of sign that... Her voice trailed off. She couldn't really finish that sentence. She knew how silly it sounded. She looked at him and shrugged. This was not a very good position she had allowed herself to be in. She could feel tears threatening to fall down her cheeks. Tears of shame, tears of embarrassment. She turned around and ran to the bathroom, leaving a stunned Daniel standing there, unsure of what he was supposed to do. She sat on the toilet, cursing herself for what had transpired in her room for the last half hour. Are you okay? Do you need anything? She heard Daniel ask. She shook her head as if he could see her. No, I'm sorry, I just can't, she said. Daniel knew better than anyone what rushing someone into doing something they were not ready for could do. He sat on the edge of the bed and ran his fingers through his hair. Okay, I'll just stay. He started before Erica shook her head again. No, she said, interrupting him. Just go. She hated herself for sounding so rude. Please, Daniel, just go, she said again. Daniel took another deep breath and stood up. He walked to the door and took a few minutes before he finally walked out of Erica's room feeling like a complete idiot. When Erica heard the door close, she slowly walked out of the bathroom and walked over to the bed. She sighed when she saw the packet of Trojans Daniel had left on the bed. She slowly sunk to the floor and wondered if her window was high enough to actually ensure that she would die if she jumped out.
Chapter 5. When Daniel got back to his suite, he could not help but feel silly. Even though his employees and friends thought he was the most eligible bachelor, the truth was that he had not been in the dating scene for a very long time. And the rules had most definitely changed. The way he managed to get Aubrey would obviously not work with Erica. While Aubrey was hyper and outgoing, Erica was cool and relaxed. More of an indoors person, really. She was the kind of person who would obviously choose to spend a night in watching an old movie rather than go out to a noisy club. She was smart and organized and balanced. Maybe that was what had drawn him to her in the first place. The balance. He'd had enough of casual dates with younger women who thought a fun night out had to include a number of colored shots before going to get down on the dance floor. He walked to the fridge and grabbed a beer before he walked back to the couch. He sat down and switched on the TV and tried to push the events of the last hour to the back of his mind. He still had a hard-on, and the more he tried to forget about Erica, the more the images of her flawlessly tan skin played through his mind like a slideshow. After a few minutes, it was apparent that his hard-on was not going anywhere anytime soon. He stripped off his clothes as he walked to the bathroom and turned on the water. Usually he would have taken a warm shower, but today he needed a cold fix. A quick cold fix. He shivered slightly when he felt the cold water run down his body as he tried forgetting Erica. He didn't know how long he had been in the bathroom, but the cold shower definitely worked. He had just walked out of the bathroom when he heard a knock on his door. He quickly wrapped a towel around his waist and then grabbed another one and dried off his hair and face as he walked to the door. He pulled the door open expecting to see one of the hotel staff with his mail or something, but his jaw almost dropped when he saw Erica standing out there. "I asked Emilio for your room number," she said in a low voice. "Care to come in?" Daniel asked as he stepped aside. She walked into his suite, and he closed the door before turning around. "You okay?" he asked, looking at her. She smiled and nodded before she brought her hand from behind her back, revealing the Trojans he'd left in her room earlier. She looked at him as he opened his mouth to talk, but she really didn't want to hear anything. She pressed a finger against his lips and shook her head.
"Oh no, this adult scene has been taken out and is exclusively available for Romancely Premium members. Check the description below to sign up." The love scene references Her Next Man's a Billionaire, Chapter 5, Love Scene 2.
"All better?" he asked. "So much better." She looked at him and shrugged. "I don't even want to ask how you knew about the whole wet washcloth thing. It's simple science. Men are good to go after a quick cleanup, but women need a whole lot of care. So it just made sense," he said. "Well, thank you," she said with a smile. Daniel looked at her and brushed a hair out of her face. "Well, you're very welcome," he said as he looked into her eyes. "So, I have to ask, what changed your mind?" he asked as he looked at her. She smiled and shrugged. "I don't know. I guess I thought I was just being an idiot. I mean, I don't have anyone I'm saving myself for, and there was a good-looking guy who was willing to take me to awesome places after one day." She took a deep breath and looked at him. "I need to start living again, and somehow I feel like you are a big part of this," she added with a smile. She looked at him and felt herself blush again. "I'm hungry," he said out of nowhere. "I'm starved," she agreed, laughing. "And there is a good plate of crispy fries in my room, speaking of rooms. How is your place so damn huge?" "I mean, this place is like my apartment, actually bigger," she said. Daniel laughed. "So is this like the presidential suite or something?" she asked. He smiled and shook his head. "No way. The presidential suite has like 2 balconies and almost 4 bedrooms. They should call it a presidential house or something," he said. "Well, presidential suite or not, I need to eat something," she smiled. I got this, he said, before climbing off the bed. She looked at him as he walked out of the bedroom, totally naked. She could not help but smile as she watched his butt walking away.
Chapter 6. When she woke up the next day, Erica was ecstatic. She and Daniel had ended up staying in for the rest of the day and night. Daniel even showed her the true meaning of room service. She had gone up from binging on fries and double cheeseburgers to lobster and champagne. As her eyes fluttered open, she noticed Daniel looking at her. "How long have you been watching me?" she asked. "I don't know," he shrugged. "And I know that's kinda creepy. I heard how it sounded." "Well, thanks for saying it," she said as she sat up. She looked around and shrugged. "I left my phone in my room. I have no idea what time it is." "It is," he said as he reached for his phone. 9:30, he said before he put the phone down next to her. "I really need to get back to my room. If not for anything, then for my phone." "Are you sure I can't charm you to stay here longer? I did pay for the room," she said matter-of-factly. A smile played on her face as he leaned in to kiss her. He was just about to kiss her when his phone rang loudly. He put a hand around her neck and pulled her to kiss her deeply before he picked up his phone. "Reese," he said when he picked up as he walked out of the room. She took a long, deep breath and looked around, wondering where her clothes were. She got off the bed and walked to the bathroom. She splashed some cold water on her face and then looked up at her reflection. A smile played on her face as she looked at her post-coital look. She had to admit, she loved it. She grabbed one of the bathrobes on the rack and put it on. "He has a rack of bathrobes, I've got just the one," she thought as she looked around the huge bathroom. She could literally fit her bed in that bathroom without a hustle. "Guess that is the difference between a room and a suite," she thought as she walked out of the bathroom. She picked up her tights from the floor and put them on the bed before she walked out to the living room where she found her t-shirt on the floor. She picked up the t-shirt and the towels she had tossed there the previous day before she walked back to the bedroom. She sat down on the edge of the bed and began putting on her tights as the events of the last 24 hours replayed in her mind. She was just about to put on her t-shirt when Daniel walked in looking distraught. "Everything okay?" she asked as she pulled her t-shirt over her head. He nodded as she stood up. "I just got a call from Venezuela. Something is not going so well in at La Nacio de Café and I just bought 30% stock," he said. Erica felt as if she had just been stabbed. This could only mean one thing. Her short fling was over. "Does that mean you have to go to Venezuela?" she asked. "Sadly, yes," he nodded. "Guess that's that then, huh? Can you say shortest fling ever?" She frowned. He smiled and took a seat on the bed. "You know it doesn't have to be over yet," he said as he looked at her. "What? You are going to let your 30% stock go down the drain and not go to Venezuela?" she questioned. "No, you can come with me," he said with mischief in his eyes. She raised an eyebrow and laughed. "Come on, get real." "I am being real," he said with a serious face. Her eyes grew wide as she looked at him. She shook her head and got up from the bed. "Me? Go to Venezuela?" she asked as she turned to look at him. Daniel climbed across the bed and got off on the other side. "Why not? You are the one who told me that you took a break from your career and everything. This would be a great opportunity for you to experience a new culture and country," he said. She shook her head, unsure of what she was supposed to say. Daniel took her hands in his. "If history has taught us anything, it's that you will go out there and come back here with your bags packed, asking when we're going to leave," he said. She raised an eyebrow and gave him a dirty look. "Really? You are going to bring that out now? Too soon?" She nodded. "So when do you leave?" "As soon as you make up your mind," he said as he looked at her. She smiled and flipped her hair over her shoulder. "You are really sure that I am going to be on that flight with you, huh?" "I have a lot of confidence." He smiled and nodded. She pulled her hand away and smiled. "Let me figure a few things out first. she said as she walked to the door. "Can't you figure them out here?" he called out when he heard the door open and close, but there was no answer. She was gone. When she got to her room, she grabbed her phone from the nightstand and looked at the screen. She could almost feel all the curses her sister and Cassandra were hurling at her. 22 missed calls, 9 text messages, 14 voicemails, she thought as she looked through the messages. "Hey sis, sorry I was a bit tied up. Are you with Cassandra right now?" She put her phone aside and walked over to the closet. She was wondering what she would wear. She could do a maxi, but that was just good for the beach. If she was going to accompany Daniel to Caracas, then she might as well wear a pair of pants. Listen to you considering the trip to Venezuela. You don't even know this guy that well, she thought as she looked through her closet. She heard her phone vibrate loudly, making her drop the hangers she had in her hands. She ran to the bed and picked up the phone. "Yes, video chat?" She smiled and typed sure before she grabbed her iPad and called her sister. She sat on the bed and waited for Emily to answer the call. "Hey, where the hell have you been?" Emily asked when she picked up. "I'm fine, thank you, and how are you?" Erica smiled as she looked at the screen. Emily, who looked seemingly upset, shook her head. "And where is Cassandra anyway?" she asked as she tried looking over Emily's shoulder. "I'm here. Your sister won't let me look at you," Cassandra said as she positioned the computer in a way that Erica could see both of them. "Hey, girl," Erica said as she smiled at Cassandra. "Hey, how's Acapulco?" she asked as she looked at Erica, who shrugged. "It's all the sun and sand you could ever want. It is beautiful," she said with a smile. "And that's why I left my phone in my room, and—" Her voice trailed off when she noticed the look on her sister's face. "You are lying. You always take your phone everywhere," Emily said. "Yeah, even in the bathroom. I've been there when you've done it, you know," Cassandra said. Erica smiled. "Your sister told me something about a guy you met out there. Did he have anything to do with the fact that you were not answering your phone calls or texts?" Cassandra asked. Erica looked at the two of them and shook her head. "Oh my God, Cassie, she has that glow. I haven't seen it since. I don't even remember when," Emily said excitedly. "She got laid, Ems. You got laid, didn't you?" Cassandra said as she looked at Erica, who was now smiling shyly. "Guilty," she said in a low tone. "Finally," Emily and Cassandra said in unison. Erica raised an eyebrow. "Hey, it was not that bad," she said. "Come on, you used to get pissed off at the old guy who walks slowly at the store," Emily said. "Well, I was in a hurry. He was making me put a lot of things on hold." Erica frowned. Emily and Cassandra exchanged a knowing look. "For a whole year?" Emily asked. "Hey, it was only 7 months," Erica said. Emily shook her head and shrugged. "Well, it seemed longer, so what's going on? What do you have planned for the day?" Erica took a long, deep breath. "Well, I am either going to swim with the dolphins at the Sisi Acapulco Magico or take a trip down to Venezuela." "Wait, what?" Cassandra asked as she looked at Erica. Erica touched the corner of her iPad and ran her finger on the screen. "What the hell are you talking about?" Emily asked. "Well, see that guy I told you about? He is part of this company La Café Nación, and there seems to be a problem, so he asked me to go with him," Erica said. "You mean La Nación de Café," Emily said. Erica raised an eyebrow. "You know it?" "Yeah, my company handles their American market." "How did he even get his foot in that? The shares are like $150, she said. "I have no idea. Today was the first time I heard anything about that company. But that's beside the point. What the hell am I supposed to do? I mean, I haven't known him for that long." She never got a chance to finish her statement. Emily was giving her one of those looks that made her thank God she was not right there. She would have most definitely smacked her right on the forehead. "Go," Emily said. Cassandra was nodding. "Am I the only one who is still reasonable here?" Erica asked. Did you miss the part where I said that I hardly know the man? You and the man you hardly know have already bumped uglies. There is no way you can get more acquainted than that. Cassandra smiled. Yeah, plus, we all know that the only reason you are asking us is because you need validation. You already want to go, you know that, Cassandra said. Word, Emily said as she fist-bumped Cassandra. And plus, this is sex on the regular without any kind of attachment.